The Galactic Council chambers on Thessara Prime stretched across a space so vast that sound itself seemed to give up before reaching the far walls. Light fell in perfect geometric shafts from overhead, carefully calibrated to highlight the insignificance of anyone standing on the floor below. It was a room designed to make you feel small. It was working. Ambassador Chen stood at the human delegation table, watching the other species file in. The Velkorth entered first, their bodies massive and armored, moving with the kind of confidence that came from 3 centuries of unchallenged military dominance. They did not acknowledge the human delegation. Chen had stopped waiting for them to. Behind the Velkorth came the Ricks, chittering among themselves, their collective intelligence spanning 17 biological minds housed in 7 bodies. They were valuable traders. They were also careful never to maintain eye contact with humans for more than the ceremonial minimum. The Talgrim came next, their crystalline bodies refracting the light into small rainbows that made the whole chamber look festive. They looked at Chen once, briefly, the way one looks at decorative furniture. The council was complete, 37 species. Humanity had been granted a seat almost 300 years ago, back when the other species thought it might be useful to have another voice in the debate. The novelty had worn off. The other voices had learned to talk around the humans, not to them. The Velkorth commander, a massive creature called Keshtai with scars that looked like design features rather than wounds, raised his primary hand. The room fell silent. This was how it always went. The Velkorth did not request the floor. The Velkorth simply existed and the floor became theirs. The medical components supplied by the human collective have failed to meet quality standards, Keshtai said. His voice carried no malice. It carried nothing at all, which was somehow worse. We are imposing a tariff, a significant one. A Rick's voice crackled through the translation system, the hegemony's reasoning. The reasoning is that we are Velkorth, Keshtai replied. The reasoning is that we can. Chen felt the usual weight settle into her chest, the weight of being dismissed, the weight of being in a room with 37 species and being the least important one. She opened her mouth to speak. She closed it. She had learned that the space in the council chamber would not carry her voice the way it carried the Velkorth commanders, but she would speak anyway because that was the job. The medical components meet all established specifications, Chen said quietly. We stand behind our work. The Velkorth commander looked at her, actually looked, as if seeing her for the first time. His gaze lasted perhaps 2 seconds. You do not understand, he said. We are not accusing you of providing poor equipment. We are informing you that your equipment is now expensive, because we have decided it should be. The other species remained silent. This was not cruelty, Chen understood. It was just how things worked. The strong decided and the less strong accommodated. Humanity had accommodated for 3 centuries. The vote took 20 minutes. Every species raised their agreement, a few with what looked like apologetic gestures. The tariff would stand. Humanity's medical supplies would become economically unviable for at least 4 major markets. Millions of credits would evaporate. Chen watched the vote complete itself with the kind of calm that comes from knowing something that everyone else does not. Does the council wish to continue this discussion? Chen asked as the vote concluded, or would you prefer we table it? The phrasing was odd. The question hung in the air strangely, as if the words had been arranged in a specific order for a specific reason. A few council members exchanged glances. Keshtai did not look at her again. The matter is resolved, the Talgrim representative said. There is nothing to table. I see, Chen said. She gathered her papers. They were not papers, actually. They were just props. The real work had been done long before this vote. Then I will submit the human delegation's formal withdrawal from the medical supply contracts effective immediately. We understand the council's position. We are honoring it. The chamber erupted, not in anger but in confusion. The Velkorth commander actually turned to face Chen fully now, and his scarred face twisted into something that might have been anger or might have been the closest he could get to surprise. "You cannot withdraw from contracts established by galactic law," the Rick's voice said. "The Council has just voted that human supplies are untrustworthy and economically uncompetitive," Chen replied. "We are simply accepting that verdict. We will not force supplies upon those who do not want them." She walked toward the exit. The chamber remained silent behind her. Keshtai said nothing. The other species did not move to stop her. By the time she reached the corridor, her hands were shaking not from fear but from something else. Something like relief. The human embassy occupied a small section of Thessara Prime's outer district. It was a section of the city that had been given to humanity almost as an afterthought, back when the Council thought humans would eventually prove useful for something. The buildings were efficient but uninspired. They got the job done. Chen walked directly to the communication array. The technician on duty looked up from his screens, saw something in her face, and stood up without being asked. Chen took his chair. The encryption protocols on the human systems were not kept secret because they were weak. They were kept secret because they were so good that no other species had managed to break them in 300 years. She typed the message in English, the language used only by humans now. It would be transmitted on a frequency no other species was equipped to receive. The message was short. "Begin Phase 1. She sent it to Earth, to the Minister of Galactic Affairs, to the Council of Nations, to the Infrastructure Authority, to the Department of Critical Systems. Phase 1. The words meant nothing to anyone except the humans who had spent the last 60 years preparing for them, who had mapped every single supply chain, every power conduit, every medical system, every agricultural facility, every water treatment plant, every communications relay that kept the galaxy from falling apart. Chen stood and walked to the window. Outside, Thessara Prime continued its business. Ships launched from the space dock. Automated systems managed the infrastructure. Life went on. But life was only possible because humanity had spent 3 centuries building the systems that made survival possible in the first place. The Velkorth had just voted to reject those supplies. They had just decided that humanity was not worth their time. They had just made the single most catastrophic tactical error in the history of galactic politics. And they would not realize it until the lights went out. Chen smiled, very slightly. Then she turned away from the window and began the work of starting a war that would never require a single weapon to be fired. The medical facility on Velkorth Prime was state-of-the-art. It had been built 3 years ago with equipment manufactured on Earth, installed by human engineers, and maintained by a rotating crew of specialists who understood the systems down to the molecular level. The facility could perform surgery on any known species, monitor vital functions with precision that had become legendary, and save lives that would have been lost under older technology. Dr. Shantir, a Velkorth physician whose career had been built on using this equipment, arrived for morning rounds as she had for every morning of the past 3 years. She entered the main surgical wing. The lights did not come on. She stood in the darkness for perhaps 3 seconds before activating her personal light source. The fluorescence remained off. She walked to the central control panel and pressed the diagnostics button. No response. The entire system was dark, not damaged, not malfunctioning, dark. On the Rick's agricultural colony designated Harvest 7, the automated systems that had been dispensing nutrient solutions to the food crops simply stopped. Not gradually, all at once. 12 million liters of stored solution sat in underground tanks, perfectly functional, perfectly usable. But the systems that regulated their distribution had been powered down simultaneously across the entire facility. The timing was precise. The impact was immediate. On Thessara Prime itself, the main power grid that fed the capital city began to flicker. Lights dimmed across 100 city blocks. A hospital's backup systems engaged. then disengaged 30 seconds later when those systems also lost power. Traffic systems went dark. Communication relays stuttered. The planet's defense grid, which had been manufactured with human technology, went completely offline. The Talgrim crystalline city detected a drop in its atmospheric processor's efficiency by a margin of 0.03%. For the Talgrim, precision was everything. 0.03% was the difference between comfortable and catastrophic. Within minutes, the entire city was in controlled panic. In the Thessara Prime Council chambers, Keshtai received reports, dozens of them, hundreds. Systems across 17 different space stations, 23 settled worlds, and countless orbital installations were experiencing coordinated shutdowns. The Velkorth commander's scarred face twisted into something that looked almost like confusion. "It is an attack," someone said, a junior official, a Rick's voice crackling with fear. "It is not an attack," said another council member, an elder Talgrim whose voice carried the weight of research and calculation. "An attack would be kinetic. This is different. This is infrastructure. This is human." Keshtai was already on his communication line, barking orders to his subordinates. "Find the humans. Every human on every Velkorth installation. I want them arrested, confined, questioned." But when the Velkorth security forces checked the maintenance areas, the observation stations, the command centers where humans typically worked, they found empty spaces. The human technicians were gone, not fleeing, not hiding, simply absent. They had stopped showing up for work. A message arrived at the council chambers. It was from Ambassador Chen. Her voice came through the translation system, simple and clear. "The human delegation has concluded that our presence in the service industry is no longer welcome. We are withdrawing our maintenance personnel from all systems across the galactic community. All systems will cease to function within 48 hours unless someone qualified to maintain them remains on station. We note that no other species has the training to operate the infrastructure we built. You voted to reject our supplies. We are honoring that decision completely. You no longer have access to human systems, human maintenance, or human support, effective immediately." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that precedes catastrophe. On Velkorth Prime, Shantir stood in the dark medical facility and understood, finally, what was happening. The equipment was not broken. It was abandoned. The humans had built systems that only humans understood, and the humans had walked away. She tried the backup power. It did not engage. She tried the manual overrides. The Velkorth engineers had never been taught what those overrides were, because learning them would have required learning from humans, and the Velkorth did not learn from inferior species. The first patient died on Harvest 7, a child whose life support had been connected to systems that now sat dormant. The child's parents stood in the darkness of an uncooled room and held a small body, and understood that the Velkorth had made a terrible mistake. On 17 worlds, people died as systems failed. Some deaths were quick, some were slow. All of them were preventable. All of them were the direct result of a species deciding that humans were not worth listening to, not worth respecting, not worth keeping around. The Ricks launched a desperate emergency transmission. They had been less aggressive toward humanity. They had treated them with simple indifference rather than active contempt. But they had also voted for the tariff. They had also dismissed Chen's warnings. And now their agricultural systems were failing, and the food supplies that kept their colonies alive were spoiling. On Thessara Prime, the Council reconvened in darkness, using backup power that was burning away its reserves with terrifying speed. Keshtai looked directly at the human delegation seat. Chen was not there. Of course she was not. There was no one to threaten, no one to bargain with. Just empty chairs and the slow understanding that humanity had been the connective tissue holding everything together, and the Velkorth had just cut themselves off from it. A Talgrim representative, The same elder who had recognized this as infrastructure warfare rather than conventional attack, raised a primary limb. "We must request emergency negotiation," the Talgrim said. "We require immediate human assistance." But the chambers remained silent, because there was nothing to negotiate. Humanity had simply stopped working, and in a galaxy built on systems that only humans understood, stopping work was the most devastating weapon ever created. Keshtai understood it then. He understood what had happened in that council chamber when Chen had asked her strange question about tabling the discussion. She had not been asking a question. She had been declaring war, and the galaxy had voted in favor of it. The emergency delegation from the Velkorth arrived on Earth in a warship. It was a statement. Military vessels did not make diplomatic runs. The fact that one had launched from Velkorth space and burned across the void toward humanity's homeworld meant that the situation had moved past negotiation and into something else. Desperation. Threat. A very thin line between the two. Ambassador Chen watched the vessel descend through Earth's atmosphere from the observation deck of the diplomatic center. The warship was beautiful in its way. Sleek. Lethal. Completely useless now. Because humanity had already prepared for this moment. They had prepared for every moment. Keshtai himself arrived in the negotiation chamber, not as a commander, as a supplicant. The distinction was important. His scarred face no longer carried the casual confidence of unchallenged power. It carried something else, something like barely controlled rage layered over desperation. "You are killing my people," Keshtai said without preamble. "Children are dying. Entire colonies are becoming uninhabitable. This is murder." "No," Chen replied simply. "This is withdrawal of services. You voted to reject our supplies and our support. We have honored that vote. If your systems are failing, the responsibility lies with those who chose not to depend on them. You built those systems. You know they cannot function without human maintenance." "Yes," Chen said, "we know that. We designed them that way." The admission hung in the air. Keshtai's body went very still. The admission was not a revelation. It was a confession of intent. Humanity had built systems that could not be reverse-engineered or maintained by anyone except humans. They had done this deliberately. They had done this knowing that one day they might need to use that dependence as leverage. "What do you want?" Keshtai asked. "A seat on the High Council," Chen said, "with full voting authority, not ceremonial, not decorative, real authority." "The High Council is reserved for—" "I know what it is reserved for," Chen interrupted. "We are changing the reservation. You will make this change, or your people will continue to die. How many more can you afford to lose before your government overthrows you?" Keshtai's jaw clenched. "If we agree, how long until the systems restart?" "Immediately. Our technicians are already prepared. They are sitting in their homes, waiting for authorization to return to their stations. Your people could be back to normal operations within hours. And if other species refuse to accept this arrangement, then other species will experience the same decline in their systems," Chen said. "The Velkorth are not unique. Every species depends on human infrastructure. Every species will either accept humanity's elevation or experience the consequences of rejecting it." Over the course of the next 48 hours, delegations arrived from across the galaxy, not as military delegations, as desperate ones. Species that had never spoken to humans except with contempt were suddenly requesting emergency audiences. Chen received them all in a small office designed to be deliberately unimpressive. She wanted them to feel the smallness of the room. She wanted them to understand viscerally what it felt like to be dismissed. The Ricks offered increased trade shares. The Talgrim offered advanced technology. The minor species offered anything they had: loyalty, military support, exclusive access to resources. All of it was accepted. All of it was documented. Chen made sure of that. Every species would remember what it cost to reject humanity. But there was one moment that changed the nature of the negotiation entirely. A Velkorth commander arrived at Earth's orbital station with a military fleet, 23 warships configured for combat. The message was unambiguous. Either negotiate in good faith or experience direct pressure. The commander was giving humanity an ultimatum. Chen received the message in real time. She did not hesitate. She issued a single order to the Department of Critical Systems. Within 30 seconds, every star system controlled or influenced by Velkorth underwent a cascade failure. Power grids shut down. Navigation systems ceased functioning. Communications relays went silent. The warship fleet, suddenly cut off from guidance and unable to navigate in space, drifted in complete darkness. No weapons fired. No missiles launched. No energy beams carved through the void. The fleet simply hung there, unable to move, unable to communicate, unable to do anything except wait for instructions from a species that had just demonstrated that it controlled the very fabric of galactic infrastructure. It took 17 minutes for the Velkorth commander to surrender. "Stand down," the message came through, transmitted on frequencies that only humanity could receive. "We accept all demands. Humanity will be granted its seat, full voting authority, no restrictions." Chen did not gloat. She simply issued another order. The systems came back online. The warship fleet regained power. Navigation returned. The galaxy began to function again. Within hours, every remaining species had agreed to humanity's demands. A seat on the High Council, full authority, no ceremonial nonsense. The decision was unanimous because there was no alternative. Reject humanity or die. It was that simple. As the negotiations concluded, Keshtai stood with Chen in a corridor overlooking Earth cities. The Velkorth commander looked at the planet below with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been something much darker. "How long have you been planning this?" Keshtai asked. "Since the beginning," Chen replied. "Since we joined the council 300 years ago and realized that no one would ever accept our voice unless they had no choice. We spent the time building systems, building knowledge, building indispensability. You were always going to reject us. We were just waiting for you to do it in a way that gave us leverage." "You are ruthless," Keshtai said. "No," Chen replied. "We are patient. There is a difference." She turned away from the window and walked toward the diplomatic chamber. Behind her, the Velkorth commander stood in the darkness and understood, finally, the true meaning of defeat. It was not military. It was the slow realization that your enemy had been building their victory while you were building your empire, that they had been preparing for the day you would declare them irrelevant. And that when that day came, there would be nothing you could do except accept the new world order they had constructed without you even noticing. The restructuring chambers deep beneath the United Nations complex on Earth hummed with activity. Dr. James Chen, no relation to the ambassador, stood before a holographic display showing the entire galactic infrastructure network. Every power line, every communication relay, every water treatment facility, every agricultural system, every life support mechanism that kept billions of alien species alive across thousands of worlds. Every single one had been built by humans, and now every single one was about to be rebuilt from the ground up. "The new specifications are finished," James said to the assembled team of engineers, architects, and systems designers who had spent the last 3 months working around the clock. "And they are ready for implementation." The new infrastructure was a work of art, not in appearance but in function. Every component had been designed with a single underlying principle. No other species would ever be able to reverse engineer it. Not because it was complex, though it was, but because it was built on human understanding of physics that no other species had fully grasped. It incorporated principles that the Velkorth had theorized about but never proven. It used mathematical frameworks that the Talgrim had never quite managed to formalize. It was infrastructure designed to be maintained only by humans, forever. "What happens when other species get curious?" asked Dr. Sato, one of the lead designers. "When they study it, when they try to understand it." "They won't," James said, "because we're not hiding anything. We're making all specifications public. Every blueprint will be available. Every component will be documented. They will be able to look at every single part and understand what it does." "But they won't understand how it works," Sato said, understanding. "No," James confirmed. "They won't. And the moment they try to replace a component or modify the system, the whole thing will fail. It's all connected. One species can't learn to maintain this because it requires knowledge of the whole system, and the whole system is too large for any single non-human species to comprehend." The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Humanity was not going to lock other species out of their own technology. They were going to make it impossible for other species to maintain their own infrastructure without human help. It was not conquest. It was dependence crystallized into the foundation of civilization itself. Over the next 90 days, human teams went out to every major world, every space station, every orbital installation. They began the systematic replacement of every system that had been installed previously. Some of the new systems were improvements over the old ones. Some were lateral moves. None of them could function without constant human oversight. The Velkorth tried to learn the new systems. A team of their brightest engineers studied the specifications, ran simulations, built test models. Every model failed, not catastrophically, just quietly. The systems would function for a while and then encounter some minor failure that cascaded into a complete shutdown. By the time Velkorth engineers understood what had gone wrong, human technicians had already fixed it. "It is like teaching someone to swim," one Velkorth engineer told her superiors, her voice carrying a note of frustrated awe, "by making them learn in water that is constantly trying to drown them." The Ricks discovered something similar. Their 17-mind network tried to parallel the human understanding of the system. They could grasp parts of it. Individual components made sense, but the whole thing refused to yield to their understanding. There was some essential quality to the design that existed only in human minds. Slowly, inexorably, every species came to the same realization. They were not independent anymore. They had never been independent. They had only been allowed to believe they were independent. Now, the curtain had been pulled back and they could see the threads that held them up. All the threads led to Earth. The young engineer named Marcus presented the final specifications to the Galactic Council 3 months after the restructuring began. He was nervous. Human engineers were not typically invited to address the council directly. But then, humans had not typically held a seat on the High Council either. Marcus stood before the assembled species and displayed a comprehensive breakdown of the new infrastructure, how the systems worked, what each component did, what failure looked like, how to identify problems, and then the most important part, how to fix them. "You can maintain these systems," Marcus said simply. "All specifications are available. All knowledge is documented. You can even improve them if you wish. But you will need human guidance. You will need human technicians. You will need humans present physically on every world where these systems operate. We are not locking you out of your own infrastructure." A Velkorth scientist raised his primary limb. "How long until you withdraw?" "We are not withdrawing," Marcus said. "We are becoming permanent fixtures of your civilization. We will be here, on your worlds, in your cities, maintaining the systems that keep you alive. We will be essential. We will be indispensable. And you will come to understand that perhaps rejecting us was not a wise decision." The chamber remained silent. Ambassador Chen, sitting in her new seat on the High Council, watched the other species process this reality. They had negotiated for peace. They had agreed to grant humanity authority. They had thought this gave them some measure of control over the situation. They were learning, slowly, that they had no control at all. that the infrastructure restructuring was not a compromise. It was a surrender disguised as restoration. That night, Chen stood in the council chambers after all other delegates had departed. The room was vast and empty, and filled with the kind of quiet that only comes after profound change. She looked at the seat reserved for the Velkorth, at the seat for the Ricks, at all the other seats representing species that had spent 300 years treating humanity like servants. Now they were going to live with humans as the foundation of their existence. It was not cruelty, Chen told herself. It was justice, delayed perhaps, but just. She left the chamber and walked toward the communication array. In a few hours, she would receive updates from Earth about the next phase, the placement of human teams on 200 new worlds, the installation of backup systems that only humans could access, the creation of dependencies so fundamental that they could never be severed without the complete collapse of galactic civilization. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy with weapons. They had conquered it by making sure that the galaxy could not survive without them. And that was a far more effective conquest than anything war could have achieved. 5 years later, the Galactic Council chambers had not changed. The light still fell in perfect geometric shafts. The space was still vast and designed to make you feel small. But now, the humans had a seat at the table. And more than that, they had changed the very way the table functioned. Ambassador Chen did not speak much anymore. She did not need to. When disputes arose, other species simply deferred to her judgment. When new technology was proposed, they submitted it for human review before implementation. When conflicts threatened, the mere mention of Chen's name was often enough to resolve them peacefully. A trade dispute between the Ricks and the Velkorth escalated to the point where military forces were being mobilized. The Ricks demanded Chen's immediate mediation. The Velkorth agreed without hesitation. When Chen arrived and heard both sides, she listened without interruption. Then she simply said, "Peaceful resolution. Both sides agree, or I withdraw maintenance from disputed territory." The dispute resolved within hours. The Talgrim had developed a new energy source that promised to revolutionize the galactic economy. They brought it to the Council, proud of their achievement, ready to distribute it to every species. But before any vote was taken, they submitted it to human review. A team of human engineers examined the technology. They found a flaw that would have caused catastrophic system failures if the new energy source had been integrated into the existing infrastructure. The Talgrim were grateful. They would have distributed a flawed technology and had no way to fix the damage it caused. Only humans could have caught the error, because only humans understood the full complexity of the systems they had built. A military conflict erupted in the outer territories between the Trika Alliance and an isolationist faction that had previously been content to stay out of galactic affairs. Ships were launched. Military formations were taking shape. Within 24 hours, humans had not fired a single weapon, but they had quietly powered down all non-essential systems in the conflict zone. No communications, no life support on stations, no navigation. The isolationist faction surrendered immediately. The Trika Alliance agreed to seek peaceful resolution. Conflict averted. Chen sat in her seat during these events and said very little. That was the beauty of absolute power. It did not need to speak. A young diplomat from a minor species, the Shi, requested a private audience with Chen. The Shi were relatively new to galactic politics, only 40 years of civilization before gaining access to the Council. They were curious, ambitious, and dangerously naive. The kind of species that did dangerous things without understanding the consequences. Chen agreed to the meeting. The Shi diplomat sat across from her in a quiet room overlooking the gardens of Thesara Prime. The view was beautiful. The city below sparkled with lights powered by human infrastructure. Everything they saw was sustained by human knowledge and human maintenance. How did humanity become so powerful? The Shi diplomat asked. You went from being dismissed to holding absolute power. How did you achieve that so quickly? Chen smiled slightly. It was the same question she had been asked by dozens of species over the past 5 years. She had given the same answer to all of them. We did not become powerful quickly, Chen said. We always were powerful. We were just patient enough to let you realize it. But you seemed so weak before, the Shi diplomat said. Your military is still inferior to the Velkorth. Your technology has gaps compared to the Talgrim. You do not have the distributed intelligence of the Rix. How were you always powerful? Because power does not come from weapons, Chen replied. Power comes from what other people depend on. For 300 years we built systems, not because you asked us to, but because we understood that in a civilization built on infrastructure, the ones who control that infrastructure control everything. We were not military commanders or brilliant scientists or unified minds. We were engineers and technicians and builders. We were patient enough to let civilization grow dependent on us before anyone noticed. The Shi diplomat understood. Chen could see it in her face. The slow realization that power was not about dominance, it was about making yourself essential. What happens if you leave? The Shi diplomat asked. If humanity withdraws again? The galaxy collapses within weeks, Chen said simply. Every system fails. Every world becomes uninhabitable. Every species dies. That is not a threat. That is a description of reality. Is that what you want? No, Chen said. What I want is for every species to understand what happened here, to understand that you rejected humanity when we were offering you a partnership, that you voted us out of the council when we were already holding up your entire civilization, and that now we are not going anywhere. We are permanent. We are essential, and you will come to respect that eventually, or you will die. The Shi diplomat left the meeting with a deeper understanding of galactic politics than most species achieved in a century of study. That night, Chen stood in the council chambers after all other delegates had departed. It was a ritual she performed regularly, to remind herself of what this place had been and what it had become. This room where she had once been treated as barely worth acknowledging. This room where she now held quiet authority over 37 species. Keshtai joined her as he often did. The Velkorth commander had come to respect Chen in the way that powerful beings respect other powerful beings, not as friends, as equals who understood each other. Do you ever regret it? Keshtai asked, declaring war. No, Chen said, do you? No, Keshtai replied, but I regret not seeing it coming. They stood in silence for a long time, two warriors who had fought a battle that required no weapons, no bloodshed, just patience and infrastructure and the slow realization that the ones you dismissed were the ones holding you up. What happens now? Keshtai asked finally. Now we maintain, Chen said. We keep the systems running. We remain essential. We ensure that no species ever forgets what it means to reject humanity. And we build toward a future where human authority is simply accepted as part of galactic reality. Not questioned, not challenged, just accepted. Forever? Keshtai asked. Forever, Chen confirmed. Keshtai inclined his head in a gesture that had once meant dismissal. Now it meant something else. Respect, acceptance, the acknowledgement that the order of power had shifted, and he had been the one to cause that shift by voting for the tariff on human medical supplies. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy with weapons. They had conquered it with patience, infrastructure, and the ruthless understanding that in a civilization built on systems, the builders own everything. They had been patient enough to let the galaxy dismiss them, and persistent enough to remind the galaxy why they should have been paying attention all along. The lights of Thessara Prime sparkled below them, all powered by human systems, all maintained by human hands, all dependent on the species that the galaxy had declared irrelevant just 5 years ago. The war was over, and humanity had won without firing a single shot.